This morning we continue talking about the life of Christ, and this morning my message is entitled, Whose Church Is It Anyway? Whose church really is it? Whose church is it? We're talking from Matthew chapter 16, starting with verse 13 through 20. And I think Charlotte and I are on the same page this morning. And you'll see that again in the sermon this morning. We did not know this, but we were on the same page this morning. But Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 through 20. If you'd like to hold that in readiness. Folks, I love the church. I really do love the church. You know, I grew up in the church. I can't remember the very first time I was in church, obviously, because I was a little baby. But my family lived in Louisville, and we attended the Mutual Church of Christ in Louisville. And I don't remember much about that. I don't really remember anything about it other than occasionally going back to visit, that my parents would want to go back and see some of their friends, and we do that maybe once a year or once every 2 years or so. When I was 3 years old, my parents built a house on my grandmother's farm in Alton, if you know where Alton is. We built a house on my grandmother's farm there. Actually, I was in the suburbs of Alton. We were in Alton Station. But that meant that my parents were working in Frankfort, and we were also taking care of the farm where my father had grown up. But it also meant that we were at Mackville Christian Church every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night. What I remember is our Sunday school started at 10, so it meant that we were at church by 9:40. We were always there about 20 minutes ahead. When I was a little older, our Sunday night services, I remember, started at 7:30 at the time. And that meant our youth groups that we had started at 6:30. And so if I was watching a ball game and I was protesting to my parents, I want to see the end of the game. You know what they told me? They said, you can read the score in the paper in the morning. You're going to church. And you know, that was something that we did. In the summer, it was Vacation Bible School in Camp Calvary. Now I love going to Camp Calvary. I love going to Camp Calvary a lot. It was a convenient way for a teenager to chase girls. And you know, I did a lot of that. Oh, probably should forget it, but that's what it was. You know, some people would say that what my parents did went overboard. I mean, when the church doors were open, there had to be a very good reason for us not to be in church. There just had to be a very good reason. Now, I'm not telling you all these things to complain. I'm not telling you that at all. Far from it. It didn't take long after I got to be an adult to realize how thankful I am that my parents did that. Because you know what it did? You might think, well, it said you ought to go to church, but you know what it really did? It developed a love for the church. And I've had a love for the church ever since. Some would say I said it was going overboard. But it developed that love. It made the church the most important aspect in my life. And it's a lesson that I've carried with me even during the time when I was outside of the ministry. As Stephanie will tell you, I rarely would ever miss church. I can't remember ever missing church unless I was sick or just something really happened. It was rare. Because I love the church and I love being around the church. I love my home church, Corinth. I love every church I've ever served, and in just a short time, Stephanie and I have grown to love Mackville Christian Church very much. But I'm also concerned about the church. Not just here at Mackville, but the church as a whole. I'm concerned about the realities that we're facing as Christians. I'm concerned about the realities that have hit the church. I want you to think about some statistics this morning. This first one is very sobering. According to a study that came out in 2021, it was funded by Lifeway Research, over 4,500 Protestant churches closed in America in the year 2019. That same year, about 3,000 new churches were born or started. So you had a net loss of what? About 1,500 churches closed in America in the year 2019. In that same study, it was noted that there were 3,700 church closures in 2014. So in 5 years, they went from 3,700 to 4,500 closures. That is very alarming to me. Then you go on. That same study also found that the median worship attendance in America had dropped from 137 people to 65 people in 2 decades, 20 years. That's alarming to me. The statistics I gave, remember, were from 2019. What's significant about that? That was the last year before the pandemic hit. So, if they went back and did these studies now, I'm sure that those numbers would actually be inflated in 2020 or 2021. Because these things really are happening around us. Let's look at the world around us. Are there churches that have closed? Yes. Now, I'm not real familiar with all of Washington County yet. I've only been here 4 months, and I'm still learning a lot of different things. But I know at the previous church I served, which was about 80 miles from our home, about 100 miles from here, a little over 100 miles away, we were there almost 3 years. And in that time, I know of 2 churches just up the road that closed. In a small town, very similar to Washington County. You find those things happening. Let's look at Mackville. I can remember several churches in this area were packed every Sunday. And as I've talked to some of you, I've visited with some of you, one of the things I hear many times is I can remember when we had big crowds at Mackville. Have you ever said that? I can remember that. I can look at my own life and I can think of 5 or 6 churches just like Mackville in this area, in this general area, that were large churches at one time and now are struggling to have 25 people meet together on Sunday morning. And I've had people here tell me, I'm not sure what our count is this morning, but we had 21 last week. We had a lot of people. I think the power was that normally I have about 30 people here every Sunday. But I've had people tell me that they can remember when there was 70, 75 here not too long ago. It's not just at Mackville. I'm not here to try to venture a guess why it happens. In some instances, churches decline or die because communities decline or die. If there's no people, there's churches that will show up so that. For a church like Mackville, I'm sure there's people that have, when they're younger people, have moved away. And if they've moved away and become active in another church where they're living, that's good. We've done our job then, have we not? If they've become active somewhere else, if they're living somewhere else. Because that doesn't mean the church is dying. What's that mean? That means the church or the kingdom is relocating. That's all that is. So that's not a problem. But folks, there's a very troubling trend. Not just here, but in every town in America, maybe all over the world. Let's go on to more statistics. According to a Gallup poll in 2020, when I first saw this, it just blew my mind. Fewer than half of Americans nationwide now say they are part of a house of worship. And notice I didn't say part of a church, I said house of worship. That would include Jewish synagogues or mosques. 47% of Americans is all that identify with that now. In 1937, when Gallup started taking this poll, when they started doing that study, you know what the number was? 73%. You know what the number was in 1999? Just over 20 years ago, 24 years ago? 70%. In the early 2000s, it started declining. And by the year 2010, that number was 62%, and now it's 47%. So you went like, here's what the graph was like. A very sharp decline. Another recent study says that less than 20% of Americans regularly attend worship. And when you say regularly, that's a very vague term. 20%. What does that mean? 1 out of every 5. 1 out of every 5 Americans regularly attend worship. Folks, those numbers should be alarming, but they're not shocking. We can see what's been happening around us. Have you ever wondered about those very things I've been talking about? I see some heads nodding. I see people that are locked in on these numbers because these are realities that we're looking at in America today. They're realities we're looking at in Mackville. They're realities that we're looking at everywhere. And we live in a world where the vast majority no longer values the church or a relationship with Christ. We live in a world that often asks, why is church that important? It's a question you might have asked yourself from time to time. Have you ever asked yourself, why is the church that important when it's 10 degrees below outside and those blankets are awfully warm? Some of you are laughing, you know what I'm talking about. Have you ever wondered that when you needed an extra hour of sleep? I think many of us have. It's a question we might ask ourselves when the fish are biting in the summer or on that second Saturday in November. My Sunday school class already knows when I think about that second weekend in November. You know what that is, don't you? Hunting season. And you know, that's churches around here, at least, we go down. It's a question we might ask ourselves if we have a million other things to do. Are all of us busy? Yes, we are. Is it easy to ask, why is the church that important? You might even ask yourself in a very basic way, why should I devote my life to the church? Well, I believe it's important to understand we do that because the church belongs to Christ. The church is important because it belongs to Christ. I want you to consider with me Matthew chapter 16. Charlotte's already read a little bit of that, but we're going to talk a little bit more about what is read here in Matthew chapter 16, starting at verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked the disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you? Who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. And I will give you keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Jesus asked, who do people say the Son of Man is? Who do people say the Son of Man is? I don't think Jesus was oblivious to what people were saying. He wasn't oblivious to that. He knew what people were saying. But what he was doing, he was challenging his people. He was challenging his followers. Who do you think I am? And Peter said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. The King James Version says, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. The words Christ and Messiah, translated from the Greek Christos, they mean the same thing. They mean the anointed one. So what Peter was saying was, I believe you are the Son of God, and I'm going to follow you. That's what Peter was saying. And that leads us on what does this mean for us at Mackville Christian Church. Namely, the church has to be about Christ. The church must be about Christ. Why? Why must the church be about Christ? Well, I'm giving you two, and they're on the back of your bulletin this morning. If you'd like to take notes as we go along. The first one is that Jesus builds the church. Jesus builds the church. When I originally wrote this message earlier in the week, I had this line in here. I said, Jesus built the church. And then when I was doing my proofing on it, I said, wait a minute, that's not correct, not entirely correct. Because what did Jesus talk about? He said, I will build. He talked in the future. So, do you think Jesus builds us today? Yes. It's not something that just one time happened. It continues to happen. Jesus builds the church. Look at what he said in Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. And I will tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. There's no indication that it's ever going to stop. Does Jesus build the church today? Yes, he does. Yes, he does. And that's why it's important. Peter, I want you to think about something though. Notice here, Peter confessed Christ. And when you were baptized, chances are that you stood in front of a group of people and somebody asked you to repeat that confession that Peter made. He said, I believe, or we say, I believe that Jesus is the Christ, what? The Son of the living God. It's basically what Peter said to Jesus. We take that as our confession today. And Peter said that, by saying that, you, Peter, are blessed. What you said is the rock upon which I am building my church. I am the Son of God. I am the Christ. I am the Messiah. See, he wasn't building on Peter, but he was building on the idea that he was the Son of God. He is the Son of God. And that's what Jesus promised to build on. Sometimes I wonder if we forget that fact. You know, we talk about, yes, Jesus. We talk about that we love Jesus and we worship God, and we should. But a lot of times people will say it's our church, my church. And if we're talking in the idea of having fellowship with each other, that's good. But ultimately, whose church is it? It's Jesus'. It's Jesus. It's God's church. I will build my church. I will build my church. Never put our wishes, our own wishes, above Him. You know, I've seen or heard of so many churches over the years dying. You know, I've been in the ministry in one way or another since 1978. So I'm old. I'm old, folks. I'm on Medicare now. You know, I'm old. And I've seen a lot of things happen. I've heard of churches getting upset because they didn't like the style of music. They didn't like how the preacher preached. There's little petty things such as the color of the carpet. I know of a church that people got upset because one of the classrooms was painted a color they didn't like. I've heard all kinds of stories. I remember one person that hearing of one several years ago. This was many years ago now. And this person had pretty much run his church for years and years. And they did something that he didn't like. And he got mad. And the people told me that he got mad and stormed out and said, my mama brought me into the church here and 6 men are going to carry me out of this church. And I don't know what that had to do with the thing, with the issue at hand. I still don't know. Of course, I don't think about it, but I just remember that, what it was told. But what was he basically saying? He said, it's about me. The church is not about me. It's not about you. Who's it about? It's about Jesus Christ. Folks, you might be able to relate to what I just said. You might be able to tell stories, but I believe the one thing that holds the church back in 2023 more than a pandemic, more than anything else, what holds the church back is the gospel of me. The gospel of me. Making everything about me instead of making everything about Jesus Christ. Folks, we're here for the gospel of Christ. The church is Christ. You know, I sometimes fear of our westernized or Americanized church. You know, I wonder sometimes if we don't put our country above Christ. I wonder about that. You know, there's nothing wrong with loving our country. In fact, most of the time we have an American flag flying in front of our house. We also have a Christian flag flying in front of our house. But we have an American flag doing it. And I guess, you know, as I wrote this, I said, I'm a good old red-blooded, redneck Kentucky country boy. You know, because, and I'm proud to be an American. One of my favorite songs of the last 40 years was Lee Greenwood's biggest hit. What was that? God bless the USA. God bless the USA. But sometimes I wonder if we shouldn't turn that around. Maybe the USA, we talk, God, heal our land, but we need to say, the USA bless or fall before God. Because we have sometimes put our country before God. Our country secondary. I've noticed this. And Stephanie, I laugh about it because I talk about this a lot. I go to a lot of gospel concerts and sing. And if you go to a lot of quartets, many of them will get up there and they will sing a song. They'll sing either America the Beautiful or God Bless the USA or God Bless America or something along that. And they start out, and what does everybody in the church automatically start doing? You know? They stand up. There's nothing wrong with that. But then as soon as they start singing Amazing Grace, the old rugged cross, what do? Folks, my freedom in Jesus Christ supersedes what I've got in this country. Now, that's just a little pet peeve of mine. I'm not saying everybody should stand for everything. I'm not saying that. I just think it's kind of ironic that we do that. And you and I do it too. I don't know if anybody's noticed that or not, but we do that. It's ironic. I'm not saying we shouldn't love our country. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that, does our country come behind Christ? Sure does. It most certainly does. Everything we do should be about Jesus Christ. During Wednesday's gathering, Wednesday night, we talked a lot about this. We talked about people looking for a church. I talked about consumerism. That we sometimes look at church as consumers instead of looking at what does the Bible say. What does the Bible say? And I can tell you that I might not meet everybody's needs and wants. I'm a human being like everybody else. There's going to be times that I might rub you wrong. There's going to be times that you might rub me wrong. But one thing I can guarantee you is I'm going to try to preach Christ to the best of my ability. Because Christ builds the church. That's important. But the second thing that's important is that Christ and His church will win. That's guaranteed. That's the message of the New Testament. If you read the book of Revelation, my advice to you is this. Don't focus so much on just what everything is there and try to put what is happening or what you read about. Don't try to put that into some current event. Look at the ultimate message of Revelation. What is the ultimate message of Revelation? Christ wins. Christ wins. It's guaranteed. That's the message. And that's a message throughout the New Testament. Look at what Jesus said to Peter in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 18 again. He said, and I will tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell, or the gates of Hades, will not overcome it. You know, during my preparation for this message, I was reading a sermon by another preacher, and he had a very good comment on this. And what he said was very telling. He said, and I quote, "The church is Jesus' choice of offensive weapons. We are marching on the gates of hell." Question, why are gates built to keep people out? So are gates offensive or defensive? Gates are strictly for the defense. And where does Jesus say the gates are attached? Hades, not the church. If this is true, then our job as the kingdom is to sharpen and use our offensive skills. The church is an offensive weapon, and I think he's right. Because, folks, we are at war with Satan. We're at war with Satan. We talk a lot about Satan, talk about the devil, but we need to get past this idea that Satan is a little cartoonish figure with horns and a forked tail and standing there with a pitchfork. That's not who Satan is. Satan is a grotesque being who's battling for the soul of every person sitting here. Every person on the face of this earth, Satan is battling for your soul. And as someone who enjoys reading history, I can tell you that the way to defeat an enemy is not by sitting back, but the great generals were always on the offensive. You think about those great generals, Grant, Patton, Schwarzkopf, those guys, they were on the offensive to obliterate, to destroy their enemy. And folks, we're at war with Satan. We sang a great song that says, "Onward, Christian soldiers, with the cross of Jesus going on before." And our victory is assured. Our victory is assured because Jesus rose from the grave. And you all know that I'm quite a sports fan. And so you know what I've been doing for the last 2 or 3 weeks. I've been watching basketball, more so that I think my eyes are, I can dribble my eyes, I believe. But Friday evening, we were sitting at home, and Stephanie asked me, said, "What time's Kentucky play tonight?" And I said, "Well, they play Vanderbilt tonight. That's supposed to start at 9, but it'll probably be a little bit later." And she said to me, she said, "Do you think they will win?" And I said, "Vanderbilt just beat them last week. They're not going to let that game get close. Kentucky's going to win this one easily." You can go on and laugh. If you don't know what happened, Kentucky lost. You know, everybody picks these little brackets, the tournament, NCAA tournament starts this week. And a lot of people will be in those little brackets. I've been in those things. I've won a few of them. I've lost a lot of them. But I'll never forget, a few years ago, I had one at the newspaper that I was working at, and they had this contest that anybody that beat me would be entered in a drawing, and there would be certain prizes that were given out. And so I was supposed to be the expert. We had several hundred entries. Guess who finished dead last? You can laugh, Jacob. It was me. It was me. I finished dead last because I messed up early. I messed up very early. I can remember a few years ago we had one, and Stephanie came home one time and she said, "I'm almost going to win our bracket I'm in. I'm going to win it." You know what had to happen for her to win it? Kentucky would have to lose. This was at the Final Four. And I didn't know whether to root for Kentucky to keep winning or to root for Stephanie to win the bracket. Let's just say this, she didn't win the bracket, thank goodness. But anyway, you know, we do that. But how many of us would like to have a guarantee whenever we do anything like that? Whenever we're picking. Would you like to have guarantees? Let me tell you something. Our victory in life is assured through who? Jesus Christ. Charlotte didn't know what I was preaching about this morning. She just knew that was Matthew 16 and she saw it in last week's bulletin. She picked a song out, and when she sent it to me this week, I kind of chuckled. I didn't say anything back to her. But think of the victory we have. Victory in Jesus, my Savior forever. He sought me and He bought me with His redeeming blood. He loved me ere I knew Him. All my love is due Him. He plunged me to victory. What? Beneath the cleansing flood. That's our victory in Jesus Christ. That's why it is, Christ Church. As I close this morning, I want you to realize that Jesus bought you. He bought me with His blood. And I pray that you will love the church. Don't just come here because you think you ought to. That's good. But come because you love the church and love Christ. Love the church. Love the church because Christ builds it. It's my prayer for Mackville is simple. That we glorify the one who bought us in every single thing we do as a group and individually. Christ builds. But be assured of your victory. The ultimate victory over death. And we're going to be celebrating it in a few weeks at Easter. The ultimate victory over death has been assured by Jesus Christ being raised from the dead.